I met I met Lisa at the Bold Authors Network. It's a group of authors who have published or are publishing books, and it meets on the first Monday of every week from 4 to 5. I've learned a lot. I've made a lot of connections from this, and Lisa was one of those. So, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you and mute myself. Would everybody else please mute yourself while Lisa's talking?
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Anne, and thank you to all of you for inviting me to speak to you today. As Anne said, she and I we have met through the Bold Authors Network, and a question came up that Anne was looking for someone to talk about short story writing. So I have been writing short stories for 30 years. And so I was suggested, and Anne and I have been in touch quite a bit since then, working on a program that she thought would be helpful to you all. So if you do leave with some valuable information, you can thank Anne, and if not, then that's on me. She also sent me the link to your Writers Guild, and I've been reading some of your work, and I know you have some very talented and experienced writers. And listening to the discussion in your meeting before, I can tell you have a lot of experience in your group. You also have a lot of poets, and I have to admit to being a little jealous of poets because to a prose writer, it seems poets have words shooting out of their fingertips. And for prose writers, that's often not the case. So Stephen King says fiction writers don't know what they do. They don't know what they do that works, and they know what they do when it doesn't work. So we need some tools, we need some concepts, we need some ideas to help us keep, our goal in mind and some structure to our writing. So I hope today to leave you with some ideas and some tools and some concepts that I've picked up over years of taking writing courses and going to workshops and reading a lot of how-to books and also reading a lot of short stories. Short stories are my favorite form of writing and my favorite form of reading as well. So I also hope I don't put anyone to sleep. So if anyone needs to step away and top up their coffee, I will not be offended at all. We're limited in time, so I do have a suggested reading list that I'm going to leave you with at the end. So, and as Lee said at the beginning of your meeting, she's going to help me with my PowerPoint presentation. I'm equally technically challenged, as I think some of you have expressed. So Lee agreed to do that for me. So Lee, if you could put the deck up and we could go right to slide 2. Excellent, thank you. So when I join a workshop, I like to know what to expect and what's going to be talked about and how much time it's going to take. So I wanted to share the outline with you first. The first section is going to be on the mechanics of short story writing, putting the pieces together. And in that area, I'm going to talk about core idea and theme, conflict, the inciting incident, character development, location and setting, and endings. And that first section should take 15 minutes, maybe 20. It doesn't matter. So after I've gone over the pieces of the short story, I'm going to use some examples to point out some of the concepts I've discussed. So I'm going to reference 2 short stories that are available online at no cost, and Anne may have sent you the link to those in advance. The first one is The Minority Report by Philip K. Dick. It's available at archive.org. And the second story I'm going to reference is C. Marie Furman's story called Coyote Story, and it's available on the Emergence magazine website. And at the end of section 1, I'm going to leave you with a short exercise that you can take away, and maybe you can use it for your short story writing group. And it's just sort of to put a few writing cues to put into action some of the concepts I'm going to cover. In the second section, I'll talk about my experience as a short story writer. As I said, I've been writing for 30 years, some success, some rejection, which is part of the gig. And in the third section, I want to move on to your writing. So talking about finding a home for your work, getting published in a magazine or self-publishing, and other ways you can earn money as a writer if you're interested in earning money as a writer or gaining more experience as a writer. And then finally, as I mentioned, I'm going to leave you with a suggested reading list. There are books of how-to books that I've read, books on corralling your creativity, and some of my favorite short story collections. I'm easily led off topic, so if we could hold the questions to the end of each section, that would be very much appreciated. But just like short story writing, there's no hard and fast rules. So if you have a burning question, don't be afraid to ask it. Slide 3, please, Lee. So one point I wanted to touch on just before I dive into the pieces was a question I often get, what is a short story? And as a short story writer and reader, I don't know, people are asking me that and how to answer it, but the short answer is the word count. So typically a short story is somewhere between 1,000 and 7,500 words. In my experience, if you're submitting to a publication, they're generally going to be looking for something between 2,500 and 5,000 words. So think of that as the size of your canvas. The parts of the short story are similar to the parts of a novel, but the timeline is condensed. So in a short story, the story could take place over a period of a few days, a few weeks, a couple of hours, or even in an instant. And for me, that's the magic that the short story form holds over a novel because it can achieve so much in such a small amount of space. So let's dive in by start identifying your core idea or theme, which is most often about conflict. When I write, I often like to start at the end because I like to know where the story is going. But even if you like to do that, you need to have a good idea of what your story is about. So start by writing down 1 or 2 sentences that are going to summarize your central theme. And that's going to help keep you focused on your core idea as your writing progresses. That's not to say your core idea might not change. It can change, might change. But if you have that concept of where the goal of your, like in a summary of your story in 1 or 2 sentences, that will keep you focused on your writing. Just like in a novel, a conflict you're character facing is often going to be the central theme or driver of your story. And in the short story, the writer has limited space to work with, so the theme, the conflict, needs to be identified early, usually in the opening paragraphs. I want to talk about originality for a second because it's something I think a lot of writers question. If you're writing science fiction or fantasy, you can come up with a conflict that nobody has ever seen before or dealt with before, and it's going to be brand new. But if you're writing a mystery or a thriller or a romance or any literary fiction, you may think, well, everybody's written about this. People have written about this about 1,000,000 times. And you may think that you don't have anything original to say. And that is not the case at all, because the originality in short story writing comes from the perspective of the writer, the view of the writer, the voice of the writer, and how the writer decides to resolve the conflict that their character is facing. Conflicts are often introduced by an inciting incident. And again, in short fiction, it's not usually going to be something major like a UFO crashing into the White House. Certainly not in literary fiction. So it might be simply a decision the character has to make, the main character or narrator has to make. It might be a decision that they're struggling with, even though they know what the right outcome is. So, and the majority of the scenes in the short story will be related to the conflict. Going off on a small tangent here, I'm going to talk about genres and POV, or point of view, or POV as it's referred to. So I think that writers often think they need to stay in one particular genre, but I would encourage you to experience with different genres and not limit yourself in any way. You know, literary fiction can be about a murder. Fantasy is crossing all boundaries these days, and romance shows up in all genres. So don't limit yourself to genre. And also don't limit yourself in your POV or point of view. I often write in first person, but if I'm stuck, that's the first thing I change. I change my POV. I start writing in the third person or even the second person, which is really fun to do sometimes. And it will get me unstuck. And if it will also show things in the story that I wasn't expecting, that I didn't know was there, and you will all understand that as writers, if I change the perspective, the POV. Slide 4, please. The development of a character, whether positive or negative, whether internal or external, whether noticed by the world or only the character themselves, is displayed through three types of character arcs: positive, negative, or flat, all of which represent a change in the character from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. Regardless of the genre, I believe that's what draws people to your story. It's what the reader is expecting, what they're looking for, that change in their character. I think positive and negative arcs are self-explanatory, and we'll see an example of the positive arc in Minority Report. A good example of a negative character arc would be every single antagonist in the Batman stories. When you use a flat arc, the character doesn't change in a significant way, but the world around them may be what changes, or their perception of the world around them may change, or their perception of the conflict they're facing may change. It's a much more subtle arc than a positive or a negative arc. In literary short stories, the character arc is often the point of the story and what the story is all about. Those stories often revolve around one event or incident or instant in which the character changes, and the reader will see the change relatively quickly. So the flat arc is often used in short story writing, and it's quite often what brings the story to an end. One tool that I find really useful when I'm working on short stories is the Story Bible. And if you're not familiar with that concept, the Story Bible is a tool that you can use to keep track of your stories, especially if you're writing a series of stories. So you want details to be the same from book to book to book or story to story to story. So if in book one, your main character goes for coffee every Monday morning at the cafe on Queen Street to plan her week, you better make sure that in book 2, 3, 4, and 5, that cafe is on Queen Street and it's Monday morning when she's there. That's the type of details you keep in the Story Bible. But you can also use them to keep track of your character profiles, which I find immensely useful. So if any of you have ever read the Southern Reach series by Jeff Vandermeer, he must have had a massive Story Bible to keep track of all the details and the crazy timeline in that series. So why I find it useful for keeping track of my character profiles is that I often find when I write, and I'm sure some of you do as well, that you learn more about your character as you're writing about your character, which is great, but that detail doesn't belong in the short story. So if you keep a character profile, you have the backstory all the time, and it may cover details that don't even show up in the story, but it's still there for you to refer to. Those details could be the person's physical appearances, which you may never describe in your short story. It may be their cadence, the way they speak. It may be their family history. It may be where they live. Again, details that you may not put in the short story, but they're useful for you to have and that you can refer back to all the time. Even in a short story, I find keeping a storyline is very important. And useful as well, which is something you would have in your Story Bible. There are templates to Story Bibles available online. I created one through AI, and it's not specifically designed for short story writing, but it can be easily modified. And if anyone is interested, I can send it to Anne after the meeting, and she can share it with anybody. That's just something Claude designed for me. Slide 5. And I do apologize, I have a bit of a cough this morning. So hopefully I'm not coughing into the mic too much. So location and setting used to give insight into your main character. Short stories often start with the character or characters in a setting and location, and it gives the reader an instant view into the situation, who the character is or narrator, and possibly even a hint of what the conflict is that they're facing. You're probably all familiar with one of the cardinal rules of fiction: show, don't tell. And one tool to help with that, to immediately add dimension to your main character, is the use of sensory descriptions. It sounds like a simple concept, but I find it's an incredibly powerful tool. So what does your character smell? What do they see? Are their fingertips grazing tall grass? What can they hear? What time of year is it? What time of day is it? I was looking at some of the past collections of your Inklings publication that you have online, And I came across a poem from the 2014 issue, and the poem was by Margaret Jane Jones called Tempered by Time. And in one of the stanzas, it reads, "To make ends meet, she raised chinchillas in her upstairs rooms." That's a fabulous sentence. Like, I just love that sentence so much, and I probably would have stopped there as a prose writer. But then it's followed by their feral fumes swirling about the house. And that addition of scent, I mean, it makes the visual so much more real. And again, in short stories, it's you need those powerful tools to drive your story and to develop your character without using a lot of words. So I think as those kind of details engage the reader specifically. So you've used your location and setting to introduce your main character in the first paragraph or two. The reader knows who your main character is. They know what they're seeing. They know what they're hearing. And it puts the reader right beside your main character when you do something like that and gives them an insight into your character just that could set up the entire story. Another old rule of writing is write about what you know about. With the ability to pretty much travel the world these days on your laptop or your phone, I don't know if this rule is as significant as it used to be, but I do think it's a really good idea to bring familiar surroundings of the location into your story. So, for example, like I don't know what it's like to live near an ocean. I don't know what it's like to live without winter and snow. In my city, we have squirrels and rabbits and crows, and I don't know what type of wildlife you all see when you're out running your errands. So that type of details that you put in your story lend a lot of authenticity and originality to it as well. So I read another one of your members' writing, The Condo Papers by Harry Barnes. As a former condo owner and current apartment dweller, I thoroughly enjoyed it. But that was a great example of using the setting and location that Harry was very familiar with to lend authenticity to his story, even the names of the places and the streets. And I love using name places to, bring life to the story. So Chickadilly Drive, the Hermit Club Bistro, that gives the reader a really good picture of the location. The next section is endings, and this is going to be short because now you have a story, you've got it full of sensory descriptions, you've got a great location, you've set and resolved your conflict, and we come to the end. And there is only one rule when it comes to the end, and there has to be one. And this is an agonizing decision for writers. I know, and I'm sure you all know it too. But at some point, you just have to put the pen down, step away from the keyboard, and submit or publish your story. So, when you write a short story, and for your long fiction writers, I'm sure you feel the same way. How do you know when it's done? How do you know when it's polished? But don't get lost in an endless revision loop. And for your new short story writers group, I would say that's really important to think about, because when you write short stories, it's very, very easy to do because you have a smaller piece and you think, well, I can spend another 2 months on it. So don't get lost. Don't get locked into that endless revision loop. Perfection is the enemy of the good, and it is the enemy of progress. So at one point, just make a decision, type in the end, and move on to your next story. So if we could go to slide 6, please, Lee. So looking at the examples that I mentioned, the Minority Report, one of the reasons I chose that, it's a well-known movie. And if you've read the story, you'll probably find that Tom Cruise and Colin Farrell do not come to mind, but it was an excellent movie nonetheless. So the central theme is this: is it moral and just to determine a person's guilt before they commit a crime, specifically a murder? And that question is clear throughout the story. By the end of the first section, we see the main character, John Anderton, is being identified as someone who's going to commit murder in the next week. And that inciting incident perfectly sets up the internal conflict he has to face, because he's the one who designed the pre-crime unit and runs the pre-crime unit. So, and he also meets the man who is tapped to be his successor in the opening paragraphs, and he is very uneasy about what's about to happen, and obviously his instinct is right. So we know that we know that John has concern about his successor, and we know that conflict is locking people up before they commit a crime. So he shows us a positive character arc, along with a lot of drama and action to get there. Anderton tricks the system he designed so that he doesn't commit a murder. He leaves his position. He no longer believes anyone should be locked up before they commit a crime. His situation is proved because he's not going to be locked up. And the readers see him as a much better person, as improving as a person. The conflict is resolved in a positive way. And C. Marie Furman's story, we could go to slide 7. The Coyote story. This is a great example of the use of sensory description to bring the readers into the story. I could read the first paragraph of this story every day for the rest of my life because this story just slays me. So, and I highly recommend you all read it. So in her opening paragraph, she writes, the sky and landscape are buckskin and blue. Just the use of that word buckskin instead of brown is, to me, blows my mind. She sees a land devoid of structures, so much so that she can dream without intrusion of even a fence line, and her dreams are filled with the call of meadowlark, the huff of a doe moolie, the song of coyotes. So the sensory descriptions she gives even give an insight to the reader into the dreams, the narrator's dreams. So I have never been to Montana. I don't even know what a doe moolie is, but I know exactly where this woman is. I know what she sees. I know how she feels. And that's all because of the sensory descriptions provided in the opening paragraphs. I feel like I'm right there standing beside her. In the Coyote story, we see a flat arc. The narrator is examining her relationship to the natural world, specifically to animals. She's an animal lover, but she's also a hunter. She talks about animals always needing to see humans as predators. In the second paragraph of this story, the narrator has to kill a coyote that she has found caught in a trap. She has to do it. It's the main thing to do. But it's something that haunts her for years. By the end of the story, which ends years after the incident of killing the coyote, she has come to accept her two-sided relationship with animals, and that's the resolution of the story. Slide 8, please, Lee. One of the writers I often referred to when I started writing was Kurt Vonnegut, and one of his 8 basics of creative writing was to always start as close to the end as possible. In short story writing, that's an important principle to keep in mind, because as Mr. Vonnegut says, don't waste your reader's time. So that's a wrap on the mechanics of short story writing. I hope I haven't overloaded you with too much information or fast talking. And if we want to go to slide 9, Lee, we'll see the exercise that you can take away for today, hopefully putting some of those concepts into action. And if you have any questions, let me know. Now's the time. Or we can move to the next section if there are no questions. I can also put this in a Word document and send it to Anne that she can send if anybody wants the Story Bible template, and then this as well. So
I would like that if you would share that with us.
yeah, I definitely do that, Sharon.
I do have a question about the end of a short story.
Yes, William?
And it said something about how the end should be muted. What do you feel about, short stories that have a twist? Because I've heard other people say that every short story needs to have a twist at the end to make it a little bit more interesting.
I think it probably depends on the genre. So, but I love a twist at the end, and a twist can be muted. I think muted. I would say in a short story, the ending is often muted. That's not necessarily the case in a short piece of a short mystery or thriller or short romance. I like stories that have an open ending. I don't think you need to resolve everything in a short story. I think that's a great way to end a story is to have it open ended and have a twist.
Thank you.
By needing to have an ending, I just mean the writer has to step away because when you're working on it, and it was funny because Anne was saying about her new short stories group that, she didn't expect everyone to come every month with a new story. I have short stories that I've been working on for years. So clearly I'm not taking my own advice there, but it can take a long time to write a short story. And I think, yes, having a twist and an end is very good.
Thank you.
I think if I can just jump in for a minute, I've written a few short stories. I'm not writing them currently, but I think what was being said there was that the end can be muted. Not that it should be, but it can be. I think a good example, I think probably classic example would be Hemingway's The Killers. Basically 2 episodes. Any editor in the world would say you got them in the wrong order. You got the end at the beginning and the beginning at the end. But that's how the story works. So that what would be the beginning had a lot more meaning when you understand what the ending was. I don't know if that helps.
I think that's, I'm not familiar with that story, Donnelly, but I think it's a great example of like someone like Hemingway who has such great intuition and just knows how it should end and how it should begin.
Oh yeah, it's a great story. I recommend it to you. The Killers by Ernest Hemingway.
I may have read it
famous one.
I may have read it many, many, many years ago when I was going through my Hemingway phase. So we could move on to slide 11, Lee. So I'm going to talk about my experience as a short story writer. So I've been writing for 30 years, as I've said. My commitment to writing has not always been consistent because sometimes life keeps you away from the keyboard. So most of my stories would be considered literary short stories. And I wasn't sure. As I said, I think literary writers rely on intuition a lot, so I wasn't sure even how I could explain a literary short story. So I asked Claude, and Claude came up with an excellent answer. Claude said, literary fiction is defined as fiction where how the story is told matters as much as what happens. So there's a stylistic component to it. And again, Anne, you mentioned when you were talking about your short stories, I think it was Anne, that you were interested in using poetic language in fiction. And I think that's something that literary fiction really lends itself to and is beautiful. Like C. Marie Furman's Coyote Story is beautiful to read. So I've had, in the 30 years I've been writing, I've had 10 short stories published in various literary magazines, all in Canada. I'm not sure what the literary magazine market is in the States, but I think it's not dissimilar from what we have in Canada. I'm really proud of those 10 stories, but it does, as I said earlier, it represents a lot of rejection, which is not failure, because you all know how difficult it is to write a short story, and you all know how difficult it is to hit send or submit or publish. I think we all know people who just could never think of putting themselves out there. So I've had a lot of rejections, and I'm nervous every time I hit send to submit my story somewhere. But it's resulted in 10 publications that I'm very happy about. I have a few goals when I write, a few principles that I always keep in mind, and the first one is authenticity. So no matter what I'm writing about, I never want to hide behind the words because I think the reader will know if the writing isn't authentic and it isn't truthful. And conversely, they respond to your authenticity. There's that saying that everything in the story is true, but none of it actually happened. And that's something I strive for in my writing because I think that gives you permission to be very, very authentic and to reveal things you might not want to reveal. So I read of some of Anne's writing, and she demonstrates her authenticity 1000%. And I find in Anne's writing and her poetry, there's an element of discomfort and an element of reassurance in her writing as well, which I think is a perfect combination for writing when it comes to authenticity. I most often write first-person narratives, and another goal I have in mind when I write is to take the personal and make it universal. It was something another writer told me when I first started writing, and it's a principle that I've never forgotten. It was something discussed originally by a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers, and I keep it in mind all the time when I'm writing. And I think in literary fiction, you have the permission and maybe even the responsibility of taking the ordinary and making it extraordinary. And you can do that when you take the personal and make it universal. Again, referring to Anne's writing and her poem Window Eyes, And it was very fun for me to read this because she says to find wonder in the ordinary. And I thought that's exactly how I write all the time, to find wonder in the ordinary. In 2022, or we could go to slide 12, Lee. In 2022, I wrote a short story about the pandemic called Shedding, and it was published in an online magazine called The Thames Review. It's still available in the Thames Review online, and I also have it on Amazon. So like all of you, I'm sure by 2022, I was struck by the amount of damage caused to society by the isolation and anger that came out of the pandemic. And what I'm sure was at that time well-intended messages from a lot of experts, we were told to embrace that isolation to put an end to our unhealthy friendships and relationships. So I don't think anybody should be in an unhealthy relationship. But by 2022, I realized that advice was nonsense, because you can't be a compassionate, empathetic person if you're only with people you like. I mean, you have to be in the world. You have to be with people that you disagree with, people that annoy you, people that you don't get along with, to have understanding and compassion. And it just seemed to me that society was falling apart. So in the story, the main character turns to stone because she feels she's losing her humanity. So as far as I know, during the pandemic, no one actually turned to stone, but it sure felt like the whole world was at some point. So, and it was my personal experience that I felt that. I felt I was losing my humanity. I felt the world was losing its humanity, that we might all turn to stone. So I saw it something as a personal experience that I could turn into a universal context. When I think about my audience, I keep in mind what I've heard about people who are taught to, journalists who are taught to be on the radio, and that they are taught to always speak as if they're speaking to one person. And that's how I write. I write as if I'm telling one person a story. It's kind of like I have a secret I'm sharing with them, but one that I want the world to know. So this approach is why my series on Amazon is called From Behind the Fourth Wall, because I always feel like I'm breaking that wall, and I do it unintentionally, unconsciously. It's just how I write. I think I'm breaking the wall between the writer, the narrator, the main character, and the reader. And again, it gives you an intimate connection with your reader, and it gives you permission to be very, very authentic and real in your writing. In 2017, I self-published a collection of short stories called Secrets Untold, Stories of Love, Longing, and Moving On. So that collection was made up mostly of my published stories, but I wrote some additional stories to complete the collection. And in every story, again, my goal was to pull the curtain back and be completely honest with the reader. One other question that I dealt with as a short story writer, certainly early in my career, and again, listening to the experience of your members, and I'm sure they would have a lot of advice to give me on this question, was the question of an editor. When I started out as a short story writer, I mean, I didn't know any editors. I didn't know any other writers. And I never, ever told anybody that I never showed my work to anybody until it was published. So nobody knew about my work until it showed up in a publication. And so I thought, do I need an editor? I don't know. I mean, if your story gets accepted for publication without a revision request, does that mean it was great, you didn't need an editor? I don't know the answer to that question. So, and when I started self-publishing, which I only did recently, I thought, well, I do want to have some feedback on this. So, and I have had some experience with editing, in between publishing my short story collection and starting my self-publishing journey. So I took some creative writing courses at a university here in Canada. And my writing teachers were master editors. And I could not believe how much they improved my writing by not changing how I wrote or what I wrote. So now I am a big believer in the need for an editor. If you can find one you trust, if you can afford one, again, that's another consideration for an amateur writer. So for my short story collection, I did have an editor. He was a publisher writer friend of mine who had edited some of my stories previously, and he helped me putting this collection together. And now I'm lucky enough to have a son who is in the storytelling business of marketing. He is a voracious reader, and he is now my editor. So my advice to you, and I'm sure the incredibly experienced writers you have in your group would agree, trust an editor, find an editor, trust an editor, get to an editor. So that's the end of this section. We could go to slide 14, Lee. And if there are any questions about my experience, please let me know. This is the important part, finding a home for your work.
Lisa, I have a question.
Yes, Celeste.
Lisa, have you, maybe you're going to talk about this, but is the use of agents as also as important to you as editors?
I have never had an agent, Celeste, and I don't know very much about agents at all. All I've ever read is that it's really hard to get one if you are not an established writer.
Thank you.
As I said, section 3 is the important part of the presentation. It's finding a home for your work. So I'm a big fan of online magazines, and there are so many out there right now. You have an excellent chance of finding a home for your work. I believe every single person in this group and your short story writing group, there's so many online publications. It's wonderful. So, but it does take time. I have spent hours and hours and hours online looking at publications, online publications, reading their work, looking at their guidelines, and deciding if it might be a match for my work. So the other advantage of submitting stories online is that you can submit one story to numerous publications online. You just have to keep track of all those publications are so that when your story gets accepted for publication, you can withdraw it from the other publications so they don't waste their time reading. So when you do find a journal, if you're looking and you think it might be suitable, you don't have to read, 4 back issues of the journal and pay for it to download it or anything like that. You can just read a few opening paragraphs of a few journals, of a few issues, and I think you'll know very quickly if that journal is right for your type of writing. Print journals are not as common anymore probably because the print industry is shrinking drastically. But it's even harder to get published in a print journal. My first few publications were in print journals, but I only submit to online publications now. But it costs money to print a small journal of short stories, and then there's the distribution, and it's not a huge audience. So they are very picky about what they publish. So I do think, especially for beginner short story writers, you have better opportunities in online publications, and they are all over the world. My publication's always been in Canada, but you don't have to limit yourself to your country because there are online publications all over the world that accept submissions from people all over the world. So I don't personally know anyone who's been published in the Atlantic or the New Yorker when it comes to print publications, but I do think you probably have to have some serious credentials to get into magazines of those calibers. One of the references I wanted to leave you with is it's a website called authorspublish.com, and they send out emails 2 or 3 times a week with just a list of journals accepting submissions, and they will describe what type of journal it is. They will describe the amount of time it'll take to reply back to you. They will tell you if there's payment of any kind. It's a really useful tool. They talk about contests, and you can unsubscribe at any time. I have no affiliation with them, but it's something that I subscribe to, and I have for years. They also have pre-workshops 10 or 12 times a year, which are useful. I've been to some of their workshops. So formatting and professionalism still matter when you're submitting even online. So the journal's guidelines will usually describe what type of format they want the short story submitted in, and they are usually submitted through a portal these days. But if they don't, the standard still applies, and it hasn't changed for years. It's Times New Roman, 12-point double spaced. That's what your document, your Word document, or your PDF should look like. I'm not a huge fan of entering contests, but I wouldn't discourage anyone from entering contests. It's just with especially small journals, if they have a contest, there's usually a fee attached to submit. And so I see it as a fundraising exercise, which again, I have no objection to. Small journals are great and they need money to keep going. But if there's a contest, especially if there's a monetary prize attached to it, they're going to have more submissions. So that's why if I'm looking at a journal, I will generally skip the contest and just submit something through the regular submission calendar. When it comes to editorial support and payment, you're not likely to get either, at least in Canada, from your short story publication. If they decline it, don't expect any comments on it. They get so many submissions, they're not going to have time to give you a critique of your submission and why they turned it down. They're probably just going to say, thank you for submitting, not right for us at this time. Good luck with your writing. It's also unlikely to get any type of payment. At least in Canada, I don't know what it is like in the US. But that being said, a publishing credit is still a very, very valuable thing to have. You can reference it the next time you submit a short story, and it's something you can and should put on your website or your Amazon author page. I recently updated my Amazon author page with references to a couple of my publishing credits. And now in a Google search, those stories come up in a Google search. And I'm quite sure it's because I listed the publications that I was published in on my Amazon author page. So that page is excellent free advertising space. So if you have one, make the most of it. There are some other ways to earn money as a writer if you're interested. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the website Upwork. It's a job posting online platform. It's very credible. It's been around for years and years. I have been hired through Upwork as a ghostwriter, and I have been hired for other creative projects through Upwork. I haven't done it for a few years, but if you want, it's a good way to practice your craft and earn a few bucks, and it's worth checking out. I also recently came across a format that I had never heard of before. People of you more plugged into the film world may know about it. It's called verticals. And verticals are very, very short stories that get turned into film, and they will either be posted on YouTube or there's lots of vertical apps on social media. So it's often romance, and the story, if accepted, it gets turned into short videos, like videos that are 2 or 3 minutes long. And then there's a series of them, and they get posted, as I say, on YouTube or on an app on social media. I recently attended a workshop by a woman who's an expert in this field. Her name is Isabelle Dréan, and she has a book called How to Write Vertical Series in 10 Days. She has been a very successful vertical writer, and it was an interesting workshop. So another great way for writers to make some money if they're interested. Slide 15, please, Lee. So there are advantages and disadvantages to self-publishing and publishing in a traditional way. So as you know, if you self-publish, you have to self-promote. It's helpful to look at your favorite writers on Amazon, and you can see their ratings and their sales, and it will all give you an idea of what to expect if you self-publish. You can also see what categories and subcategories they use for their stories and use them for your story. Regarding genres in short fiction, literary fiction is considered the backbone of the short story. But if you look on Amazon, it's science fiction and romance short stories that still have the highest ratings and the biggest sales. As I mentioned a minute ago, a publishing credit is a valuable thing. Many people are still attached to the idea that self-publishing indicates a lack of quality, which we all know is wrong, completely wrong. But having someone else publish your work is a valuable highlight in your promotion. One big advantage I see in self-publishing is that you can see how many people are reading your story, and if you're lucky enough, get a review and see what they think of it. If you submit a story to an online publication and they publish it, you will probably never know how many people read your story, if anybody other than the editor did, and you won't likely get any feedback on it. So that's a big advantage of self-publishing. It also will temper your expectations, which isn't a bad thing. I was shocked to discover when I started self-publishing that the entire world wasn't reading short stories. And I was equally shocked that the entire world of writers wasn't writing short stories. I thought everybody read short stories. And I recently discovered not everybody reads short stories. So congratulations to the short story writers and the Sun Coast Writers Guild. So Anne spoke to you about the Bold Authors Network, the group that Anne and I belong to. And I would be remiss if I didn't say there's a great network. I've learned so much about self-promotion, and I got to connect with Anne through this group and led to this wonderful opportunity for me to speak to you today about short story writing. So again, a great tool for learning how to promote your work. Any questions on that section? You guys are a wonderful audience. I was so afraid of questions. So slides 17 to 20, you'll see the list of my suggested reading list. I don't know if you're familiar with the Stephen Pressfield books. He's had a series of books, and it's really about tackling procrastination, self-doubt, self-sabotage. I read them over and over again. Jessica Brody, she has Save the Cat, writes a novel. And even though it's about a novel, it's a really good how-to book because she talks about the different parts of your stories and she describes it as beats and tells you where they should be in the story. Jerome Stern has a story called Making Shapely Fiction. It's another good how-to book, and it has an alphabetical list of different topics that the writer might be interested in looking at.
Anne, I'm sorry, Lisa, I
Yep.
wanted to,
Yep.
you gave me another idea as you were talking about self-promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's it's getting more common, and people here may not realize it if you're not a regular YouTube video watcher, which I am, that people are reading books on YouTube. They're videotaping themselves reading books, and it's becoming an increasingly popular way to listen to books, watch them being read, and to self-promote because you can read your own books this
I
way.
did not know that. That's amazing, Celeste.
Yeah. I recently encountered a man who started reading the great books of the Western world. You may not remember that, an old Encyclopedia Britannica um, publication of, a couple, 4 dozen books that came out in the mid 50s, was updated in the 90s. And somebody in the 2000s, just maybe 10 years ago, decided to start reading them online and has a following. I
That's
mean,
amazing.
yeah, it's an opportunity.
That's a great opportunity. And obviously for people who are happy in front of a camera, which I am not, but
Well, and even if you're not, you can get happy. You can
okay.
actually get pretty happy practicing filming yourself in front of a camera. It's not bad.
And I know I'm a huge fan of Audible books. And again, there's some issue over people think if you're listening, it's not really reading. Well, it sure is reading. And I am a big fan of Audible books. I have a huge Audible library. So, but
Right.
I didn't know that, Anne, so Celeste, I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, do. Audible books are great, except they're usually commercially produced. They use well-paid actors. They're
Hmm.
very expensive for writers
Right.
to make
You're
their
right.
own audiobooks. But if you do depending on your own style and whether, you're a performance person and want to read your own, but you can get your books read on a video. So anyway, something to think about.
That's a great idea, and especially if like a lot of writers have, theatrical backgrounds as well or theatrical tendencies as well, so they can do that. I mean, I don't think I could do that, but I have a friend who's a writer, and he has a theater background. I'm gonna suggest that to him. He's a good-looking fella too, and so I'm gonna suggest that to him. So that's a great idea. Thank you, Celeste. One of my favorite books is by Rick Rubin. It's called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And he talks about tapping into your creativity and letting it flow. He also has a podcast called Tetragrammaton, and he speaks to artists in all fields, and it's just about the creative process. And it's a wonderful podcast. Twyla Tharp recently came out with a book herself, the famous choreographer, The Creative Habit, Learn It and Use It for Life. It's an autobiography, but she has some exercises in there about corralling your creativity and putting it to use. And then there's a link to Kurt Vonnegut's 8 creative writing rules there that I like. And if you go to slide 22, yes, thank you. And some of my favorite short story collections, Seamery Furman, Salmon Weather, Coyote Story is in that collection. It's a literary fiction memoir. Pam Houston, Cowboys Are My Weakness, literary fiction. Alice Hoffman, The Red Garden. It's listed as a novel, but it's a collection of connected short stories. And it's I love this book. It's I would consider it literary fiction. I don't know what genre she's actually put it in, but there's magic realism in that collection, which I adore. But it's like she does it so well. It's like you believe everything she says. It's a really wonderful book. So, and we have Michelle Good. Michelle Good's a Canadian author. She has a short story collection, and she won a bunch of awards for it called Indians. It's connected short stories. It's about the horrible history we have here in Canada of residential schools. It's a hard read. I will warn you that. It's a hard read, but it is a wonderful book. And Tim O'Brien, famous American writer, The Things They Carried, literary fiction memoir about Vietnam, which I read when it first came out, I think, and I just absolutely love that book. Another book, which isn't a collection of short stories, he's a poet, and you have poets in your group. You probably all know who this man is, David White, Consolations. He's an Irish poet. And every chapter is a different word, and he just writes about that word. And it's really wonderful way at looking at language and how to use language. So I love that book as well. So thank you, everybody. You can find me at my website. I'm trying to promote myself, lisafoley.ca. You can also find me on my Amazon author page. And those two, The Shedding and the Thames Review and 9-Point Buck and the Scarlet Leaf Review, are my most recently published short stories, and they're still available online. So thank you to everybody. This has been a wonderful experience, and what a wonderful group and incredibly talented group of people. Wow. I might have to move to Florida. And you don't have winter.
Yeah. Lisa, thank you. I have a question about the literary fiction / memoir.
Mhm.
Explain a little bit more about what that is.
So I would say, and again, I don't know Seymour Furman personally, but if you read that, like it will come as, well, I think The Things They Carried would be a little bit that way too. So it's things that actually happened. I mean, like in The Things We Carried, he talks about what happened in Vietnam with his troop, with the group he was with, his troop. I'm not sure what you call them. But he turns them into stories. And then what he's talking about in The Things They Carried, even though he talks about, the physical trials that they went through, which were horrible, he talks about the emotional and internal damage, the scars you didn't see when they came back with. So he turns it into, I think he takes, things that really happened, but he weaves a story around it about the emotional damage, the internal damage that these men came back with.
Okay, thank you.
I think you can absolutely take a personal story, make it very personal, very real. Anne has done a lot of that in her poetry, and turn it into a story. Like you can weave it in such a way that your reader will not know if it's really if it's a memoir or a story. That it can be, like it sounds like a story, like a fairy tale or something.
I have a question.
Yes, Martin.
What is, in your opinion, the best length for a short story?
I think it depends if you're submitting your short story for publication or you're self-publishing. If you're submitting for publication, under 5,000 words, for sure.
Under 5,000 words.
Yeah.
Or, if you're trying to get total a lot of exposure on it. Yeah.
Again, so I would say under 5,000 words because that's usually the guidelines. If you're going to submit to a publication, they're going to usually want it under 5,000 words. I think if you're self-publishing, I think you can break those rules. So Minority Report is considered a short story, is always referred to as short story, and Philip K. Dick is very famous, of course. But Minority Report was, I think, 17,000 words. And Total Recall was also based on one of Philip K. Dick's books. And I haven't read that one, but I think it was probably equally as long. So I think the more established you become, the more freedom you have to break the rules as far as length goes. I used to I love a longer short story, and I think established writers have, that runway, and that credentials that allows them to write longer short stories. I think for maximum publication, I mean, I grew up with the long short story format. I don't know if today, because people's attention spans have shrunk, if maybe that's an indication, if that's, shed some light on how long a short story should be. Everyone talks about how, people's concentration and focus is shrinking rapidly. I'm writing
Okay.
just I'm working on a short story now, and it's turned out to be much longer than anything I've written, and I'm turning it into maybe I haven't decided if I'm going to chapters or parts, but it's going to be when it goes on Amazon, it will likely be in 3 or 4 sections because it is much longer than anything I've written.
Hmm. Yeah, I had an idea just now for something that I want to do, and I've been writing for 60 years, so that's a little bit long, but and most of it I have been a self-publisher, and well, one of my books sold for, well, still selling, and uh, sold for, oh, a 200,000 book. But yeah, but it was a specialty,
That's
and
amazing.
it was part science and part hobbyist. But anyway, what I suddenly thought about doing was I wrote a short story fairly recently, and I thought it was good and interesting. And just in listening to you talk, though, I wondered if you could write a series. For instance, the first short story that you wrote would end with a sort of a question mark, but not a blatant question mark. And that would introduce the next short story that you would write. And so it would be a continuum of maybe a dozen short stories that kind of had a link between them as they went. So you'd wind up with a book of similarities of short stories of uh, a family, for example, that might extend through several generations that way, with different situations and problems and things. And I don't know, I just thought that might be a fun thing to do.
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Mhm.
I think, and I think generational fiction is always really popular. Like, I think that's a great idea. And it's not dissimilar from what Alice Hoffman does in The Red Garden, because all the stories take place in the same community. So they involve different people in the community, but they all the stories do sort of bounce off each other there. So I think that sounds like a wonderful idea.
Yeah, that's something I'll follow up and see what happens.
Yeah.
I think I'm reasonably good at writing,
It sounds
but
like
I'm
it.
horrible at selling or doing things with it.
Yeah. I think all artists are terrible at promotion. So
Yeah.
I I had a question, if I may.
yes,
You mentioned Total Recall. Now that became a movie, I do believe.
the book was called We Can Sell It to You Wholesale, I think, and the movie was called Total Recall.
Oh, okay. Now, did he have
Philip K. Dick
pay
wrote the book
like
that the movie was based
did he
on.
get proceeds from the movie? I knew the a neighbor of ours a long time ago when we were up north. He wrote oh goodness, of course I'm having a moment. The one with Mel Gibson and
Braveheart.
Danny Glover. No,
Oh,
the
I know the
also
ones with the cops.
yeah, I forgot. I mean, it's escaping me. Everybody knows
I
it,
know,
but
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
he wrote it,
Yes.
and then it came out as a movie, and he called MGM. I think it was MGM that put it out. He said, "Hey, that's my story." And they said, "Well, we'll give you 10%." And of course, his career. Then he wrote the sequels with another chap that they chose. The legal, what was it? I don't know why. Hey, somebody help me.
I know exactly. I know the movies you mean exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Lethal Weapons.
Lethal Weapon, that's it. And yeah, and now, I mean, he's loaded now. But he had to, they made it into a movie. when it
Well,
was his story. Didn't
I'm
even
sure.
know.
Yeah, I'm sure the people who made, I know it was Steven Spielberg who made Minority Report. I'm not sure who made Total Recall, but I'm sure they had to pay Mr. Dick's estate for rights to the story. I don't know what the deal was, but I'm sure they didn't get it for free. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, how do you protect yourself? Because if he hadn't have called them,
That's
they
amazing
would.
to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think one of your new members was a playwright, and he may have more information on that than I have.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to him in years. It was a long
Yeah.
time ago, of course, Lethal Weapon series. But he did, out of it, he also wrote us a series on TV with a detective and his sidekick, and who was a girl, who was an Orient. Well, I know it's not the right Asian girl, was his sidekick, and it became very popular as well on TV. But that it's kind of it's opened up doors for him, but he didn't. He had to follow through with it.
Well, let's hope we all have that success.
Yeah,
there's hope for us.
I have a question, Lisa. And by the way, thank you. This was an amazing presentation. I took so many great notes. What are your thoughts on, I've gotten it's been recommended from more than one source to write in terms of if you really want to publish, to write first find the market. In other words, first do your research, finding markets that you think you can write for, and then write your story to tailor it specifically for those outlets versus writing and then, I'm not really good at trying to, obviously it's a bit, I guess it's in terms of practical. It's certainly much more practical, I suppose, if your true intent is to publish your work. What's your thoughts on that? Like, how would you sort of balance that versus, writing from, you have an idea and you write and then you try to find a home for it?
I think it depends on the writer's goals, and I think you can probably do both. Um, I I could never write for a market. That's just not how I write. And I don't know how the people in your group, the majority, feel. Most people write because they feel they have something to say. And as I said, I've only recently discovered in the last year, through the work that we do in Bold Authors Network, how small my market is. I had no idea, but it's not going to change the way I write. That being said, I think it's like if you can write for a market and be successful in doing that, then you can make some money doing that while you write what you want to write. And I think that's a great idea. I remember at the time when, we'd go to the grocery store and the bestsellers would be lined up by the cash, and there'd be like a little one of those twirly things with Harlequin romance books on it. And I thought, well, if I could write Harlequin romances, apparently a lot of people buy them, right? And I tried and I could not write a Harlequin romance to save my life. But I think if you have that ability and you can make some money doing it, support your other writing, by all means do it. Or if that's all you want to do, no harm in that.
Right. And I think there's different, obviously, as you said, it comes down to the writer's goals, because I tend to be, more in I love what you said about, sort of the universality and the theme of your personal voice, finding your personal voice. And that obviously conflicts with writing for a particular market. But I like your advice to kind of, depending on what your goals are, that you can do both and you shouldn't, kind of sideline one for the other. But because writers, we all have different sorts of talents, so maybe if someone does have the ability to write for a particular niche market, whether it's romance or whatever, to go for it. But then to also leave room for the creative spark, which is something that I hope in the form that we're creating is to really kind of foster that idea, foster that atmosphere of creativity.
Well, and that new market, I told you that the verticals market, which I had only heard about a month ago. I
have not heard of that at all.
No, and as I say, it's mostly romance, but these are very short pieces of fiction that they turn into very short pieces of video, and it's a huge market. Like this, Isabelle Dréan, who gave this workshop, she said she had a piece accepted on Christmas Day of last year,
Wow.
and they were filming in January. That's how fast it
Oh,
happened.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And there's it's short fiction. And again, I'm not a romance writer, and I've discovered I could never be one. Like I don't have that skill. But I think if you do, it's a great market to try. Like if you have writers in your short story group who want to look at something, marketable, I think that's a great thing to look into.
Yeah, thank you. And I do also love the idea of collections of short story, to Martin's point, to have that follow a scene, whether it's a location or
Absolutely.
a family, or I think I haven't really looked into the marketability of that, but I think it's a lovely
I do too.
um, you know um, interesting. I think
Yeah,
there's a lot of potential there for
I think that's a great
people.
idea. Yeah.
Are there other questions for Lisa?
Yeah. Do you know if there's a book titled How to Finish What You Started Writing? I'd buy that one.
Martin, maybe you should write that one because we all need that one.
Well, okay, if the next time I finish something, I'll write a story about it.
I have been in touch with Anne quite a bit over email in advance of the presentation. And then she said Lee would be doing the handling the PowerPoint deck for me. And I don't even make decks where at my day job. So I spent so much time on that deck. And I finally said to Lee, I sent it to her Thursday. I said, I'm taking my own advice and putting the pen down. I have to send it. So stopping is hard.
Yeah, I've got more writing that is unfinished than I have finished.
Yeah, I think you're not alone.
Lisa, I had a question. How were you able to find the quote from my poem on
I I downloaded your collection on my Kindle app.
oh, okay. And the same with Harry Barnes?
Yeah, I downloaded his collection.
Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, that you would take the time to do that to make it so personal for us is just fills my heart.
Well, you're welcome. And I have to admit, I was a little daunted when I looked at your website and started reading some of your writing, and I thought, oh, these people are way ahead of me. But it was a pleasure to read some of your work. And like, what a remarkable group you have, Anne.
Well, it's been in existence for 35 years. This is my
Wow.
third time as president. So I'm still here, and I've had so many mentors along the way. And I think when we've had speakers and people from our own group who have shared so much of how they did things or why they did things, um, they've just been so inspirational, and I think sometimes we need that as well. And I know a lot of people are writing just for their own purposes and not
Mhm.
really to publish. Um, but I think it's helpful to know a little bit about both. And I'm so eager to meet some of these new faces at our luncheon, and that will be great. So if there are no more questions or comments,